Okay, moving on to the next team in the SEC that we will be going over today. That would be Coach Jerry Stackhouse and his Vanderbilt Commodores. And Coach Stack will be entering his second season on the job. And I think one thing we could all agree on is, Vanderbilt is one of the tougher college basketball jobs in the country. And it's tough because not only are you playing in a league like the SEC, which has so many good coaches and so many good programs and so many teams that are willing to spend money on resources that really prioritize basketball. That's been, one of the more recent trends we've seen over the last couple of years in the SEC. And I feel like Vanderbilt, I'm not going to go out here and bash Jerry Stackhouse. Like, I have no right to say if he's a good or bad coach or not, and I understand Vanderbilt last year, they had some NBA talent like Saban Lee, who got drafted the other night, and Aaron Nesmith, who only played in about 15 games, but he was drafted by the Boston Celtics the other night. And I feel like Vanderbilt, it was just hard for them last year to make any improvement because 2 years ago, they had some talent and still it's the same thing. The SEC was just so hard, and ultimately, even though they may have been a little bit better talent-wise, they still could barely win any games just because the rest of the league got better, even though they did also. And I do think, unfortunately, if you are a fan of this Vanderbilt team, the same thing, unfortunately, kind of applies for this team this season. And I feel like the vibe around the current Vanderbilt basketball program would be a little bit different if Saban Lee ended up coming back to school. And I'm not saying he made the wrong move because Saban Lee was actually a second-round pick. And I feel like if he would have came back to Vanderbilt, there is, of course, no guarantee that he would have been drafted in that second round. So good for Saban Lee for getting drafted. My only issue is with this year's Vanderbilt squad, I'm not really sure who they could build around because if Saban Lee would have came back, you then have that star you could build around. With Saban Lee, you have Scottie Pippen Jr., who, as a freshman, averaged 12 and 3 and 4 last year. That's not really bad at all. Maxwell Evans, a senior, experienced player, averaged 8 and 3, could shoot it a little bit. They also bring in DJ Harvey, the transfer from Notre Dame, 6'6 senior. He averaged 10.7 points per game, 4.2 rebounds per game, about a full assist per game last season, and I was impressed with what he was able to do. Dylan Desu, the 6'9 sophomore, he was their more athletic forward type, and then they also bring in Isaac McBride, the transfer from Kansas, and Quinton Milora Brown, the Rice transfer, who averaged 7 and 6 last year. And once again, I think it's hard to justify judging Jerry Stackhouse during his first year as the head coach of Vanderbilt because let's keep in mind, Vanderbilt is a place where the benches are not in the right place in the arena. And when you're playing in the SEC, and when you're an academic powerhouse like Vanderbilt is, it is very hard to build a successful team and a successful program. And I think Vanderbilt fans are kind of learning that those Kevin Stallings glory years, they seem like a long time ago, even though they're not. It wasn't that long ago where Vanderbilt was, producing NBA players, guys like Luke Cornett, and they weren't that bad. They would be getting to the NCAA tournament somewhat consistently, but Bryce Drew obviously didn't work out, and it's funny because he brought in some NBA talent. He was able to recruit at a really high level, bringing in Darius Garland and Shimmy Shittu, and I understand Darius Garland got hurt, but at the same time, it's not like Vanderbilt, since Kevin Stallings has left, has been anywhere close to the NCAA tournament picture. And this year, would I be surprised if they're better than they were last year? No, because it's not like the standards are high. Vanderbilt only won a couple SEC games last year. And this year, I think the bottom to the middle tier of the league is worse, so maybe they could win a couple games, especially Memorial Gym, as weird of an arena as it is. I feel like Vanderbilt, every year they do pull like an upset or two in that building just because it's one of the weirder venues in college basketball, and really no one else likes to play there. But at the same time, when I look at this Vanderbilt squad, there isn't that much that when I look at, I say, wow, that's a really good guy that could improve. And I feel like if you're a fan of Vanderbilt, you might see a lot of that going forward. But if there is something to be optimistic about, it would be Scottie Pippen Jr. He came to Vanderbilt as a 3-star recruit, and he started 31 games at the point guard position last year, and he ranked 3rd in the SEC in free throw percentage, knocked down 36% of his threes, and he wasn't that efficient inside the arc, but he does have plenty of room to grow during his sophomore season. And I feel like if all things go well, maybe he could be a second team or third team all SEC member. The other guy I like on this Vanderbilt team is Desu. He's another former 3-star recruit who ended up starting all 31 games last year for the Commodores. He had an outstanding performance in his freshman season, including a 21-point outburst against the Crimson Tide of Alabama on January 22nd. Like most rookies, Desu also had plenty of not-so-great performances as well, but I do feel like the experience gained last season should help those instances become few and far between in year two. Desu's value, I feel like, lies in his activeness on the defensive glass and his finishing inside. And he does have potential to face the floor. I get that. But I feel like, once again, it's just hard for me to see, okay, even if these guys do improve a little bit, I'm just not 100% sure how exactly I see Vanderbilt getting significantly better. And I feel like the last 2 years, you could comfortably pencil Vanderbilt into that 14th spot in the SEC. And I feel like when people are reading this SEC preview, they're going to be like, Zach, what are you doing? Putting Vanderbilt as the number 13 squad? They should be a lock for 14. But I don't trust the next team I'm about to talk about and their talent. And it's not like I trust Vanderbilt either, but I don't know. I don't think Jerry Stackhouse is a bad coach. I think he legitimately deserved to get the job. And there have been plenty of guys who have been hired by a college basketball program as a head coach that when you look at their resume, you're like, did he really deserve that job? I think Jerry Stackhouse actually was going to be a college basketball coach eventually. And there was some controversy with that and the search firm that the Vanderbilt Commodores actually ended up using when Bryce Drew got fired. But Stack has been there for 2 years. He's been an assistant coach with the Raptors from 15 to 16. He was then the head coach of their G League team, which won a couple championships through 2016 to 2018, then was an assistant for 1 year in the Memphis Grizzlies organization, and then last year he became the head coach of the Vanderbilt Commodores. So Jerry Stackhouse is obviously a guy that played big-time college basketball, played in the NBA, and I think if you're a Vanderbilt Commodores fan, you're just going to want to see him improve and get better as a head coach and the team as a whole. So I'm not 100% sure that's going to happen, especially with this year's Vanderbilt squad. But at the same time, I don't think the SEC at the bottom is that much different compared in terms of talent compared to Vanderbilt and the other teams. So I'm going to predict them coming in 13th. We'll see if I nail that prediction or not. But yeah, that's Vanderbilt.